Matt EA is a young law graduate who works in the legal department of a mid-sized company. He has a clear goal: to learn everything there is to know about the European AI Act for an upcoming job interview. The law regulating the use of artificial intelligence in Europe could, in fact, be one of the main topics of the interview. He has already explored the topic to some extent, but Matt EA wants to thoroughly understand the text of the law. He also wants to be able to connect theoretical principles to concrete examples, preparing himself for potential questions during the interview. The first learning objective Matt EA has set for himself is to be able to describe the structure of the European AI Act, identifying its main components, the stakeholders involved, and the risk categories for AI. All topics that could come up in the interview. When we begin exploring a topic, we can take into account the fact that large language models are proving to be increasingly useful tools for supporting research and the selection of relevant sources. Although in the early stages of their development, around 2022, 2023, they often generated non-existent or inaccurate references, the more recent versions have improved significantly, and they are drastically reducing the generation of fabricated sources while providing increasingly reliable guidance. Today, many models not only identify useful sources, but can also include direct links to verifiable resources, making it easier to access academic content, scientific articles, or specific reports. This progress, along with their integration with services specifically dedicated to content research, enhances their reliability as a support tool for students, researchers, and professionals, especially when used in combination with a critical verification of the suggested sources in their respective fields. However, it is crucial to remember that consistently adopting a mindful approach remains essential, always validating references and cross-checking information with accredited databases. Matt EA begins by carefully asking his LLM to select relevant and comprehensive academic sources on the topic of the European AI Act, so that they can be used for further, more in-depth exploration. Matt EA wants to get a general idea. Can you explain in 2 lines what the EU AI Act is, and then what parts it consists of? Without knowing it, Matt EA is applying the theory schema, developed by Bartlett almost a century ago. According to this theory, our brain organizes knowledge into schemas, mental structures that help us categorize and understand information. It is a theory that shows some limitations when it comes to complex processes. But when we ask ourselves regarding a topic, what parts is it made of? What are its sections? Into what steps is it divided? We are indeed taking the first step in this process, creating a sort of mental shelf, on which we can later add details and further insights. Once we have defined the outline of the topic we want to explore, we aim to start understanding this new content better. And when we encounter something new, one of the most natural cognitive reactions is to ask, what does it look like? This question is not random. Our brain is designed to function in an analogical way. By seeking similarities between the unknown and the known to process, understand and memorize information in a more straightforward manner. In fact, Gentner's structure mapping theory explains that comparing structural similarities, such as between what we already know and what we want to learn, helps us understand better and more quickly. Gentner summarizes it as follows. Analogies allow us to transfer knowledge between seemingly different domains, facilitating learning and problem solving. So every time you ask yourself what something resembles, you are leveraging one of the most powerful cognitive mechanisms to make a new concept less abstract and more understandable. Based on this theory, asking your LLM for examples related to your context, metaphors, or even comparisons can be very useful. For example, Matt EA asks, can you represent the governance of the European AI Act with a metaphor? And the LLM provides a very interesting response. Imagine the governance of the European AI Act as a grand symphony orchestra, The member states are the sections of the orchestra, and so on. It continues with the metaphor. Continuing his dialogue with the LLM, Mattia asks for an example. I didn't fully understand the governance and coordination mechanism between the member states and the EU for the implementation and monitoring of the regulation. Can you give me an example? Then he continues by asking for a comparison. Okay, so is it similar to what happens with food safety regulations? The LLM clarifies, yes, the governance mechanism of the European AI Act is indeed similar to that used for food safety inspections, but applied to the technological context. And it continues by describing similarities and differences. Examples show how what you're learning works effectively in reality, such as helping you make connections with situations you already know in your daily life, and that you can imagine. After understanding an example, however, a metaphor helps you simplify and internalize the concept by linking it to an image, to something familiar to you, in this case, an orchestra. Metaphors work just like a bridge between what you already know and what you're essentially learning. Finally, a comparison allows you to see similarities and differences, helping you better organize information and understand how a concept relates to others in a more detailed manner. This process strengthens your critical analysis skills. Our suggestion is to take advantage of all these methods in sequence. Ask for an example, a metaphor, and a comparison in sequence. This is a strategy. It is extremely effective for learning because it allows the brain to approach a complex concept from different angles, leveraging cognitive processes that complement each other. Each step stimulates different mechanisms, improving comprehension, memorization, and practical application. Finally, we must not forget that LLMs can also offer us an interesting level of multimedia support. When dealing with complex concepts, an additional aid for understanding them can come from requesting the creation of an image or a diagram that helps you concretize the metaphor. Asking the LLM to create diagrams or images to represent a complex concept directly applies Paivio's dual coding theory. This theory argues that learning is more effective when information is presented both verbally and visually. Diagrams, concept maps, and schemas generated by the LLM activate mental images that, when combined with verbal explanations, significantly enhance comprehension. This approach works because it increases the connections between verbal and visual modalities, allowing the brain to encode information in different ways. The result is an improvement in memory recall and a greater ability to apply learned concepts in different contexts. In other words, using schemas and images, it's not just an aesthetic aid, it's a powerful cognitive tool for deepening understanding. Finally, Mattia can get help from his LLM to analyze and deeply understand texts, leveraging the LLM's ability to recognize linguistic and conceptual patterns. We can indeed provide an LLM with a complex text and ask it to make the logical structure of the underlying reasoning explicit, highlighting inferential steps and argumentative elements within it. For example, in a legal text, the LLM could attempt to reconstruct the application of a legal theory, such as positivism or interpretivism. In an economic essay, it could identify the principles of the Keynesian school or the neoclassical school, while in a scientific article, it could trace the logical derivation of a theory from existing literature. Mattia, for example, asks, "Can you explain to me in detail what the main legal theories underlying the European AI Act are?" The LLM responds by listing the theory of harm, the principle of proportionality, and so on. It is not guaranteed that the first results of such a complex operation will always be entirely convincing, but the subsequent dialogue will help us build a well-argued opinion.